second. Okay. So one of the questions that Rav Cohen raised was, wait a minute. Okay. So one of the questions that Rav Cohen raised was, okay. So one of the questions that he raised yesterday was that this will that we call a chatzi zachar, half of a male, in other words, where the custom was to write in the will that one moment before I die, I want my daughter to get $100 million of my estate, but only if my heirs do not fulfill the condition that I place in the will. Okay, so he says that's all well and good, that'll work if the testator is a man. But what if the testator is a woman? And she predeceases her husband. He says, because the Hakaimalan, the Shulchan Aruch Even Ha'ezer Simin Tzadi Siftes, the Isha Shemachra Minichse Milug Achar Sheniseis Lamesa B'chaye Bala. He says that if a woman divests herself of property that she is the legal owner of, Habal Motzi Hanachasim Miyad Halukuchos, then the husband can, if she predeceases him, then the husband can go to the purchaser of that property and confiscate it from them. It's because the husband is considered to be the prior buyer, as the Gemara explains. He says, and if that's the case, then any kind of lien that she tries to place upon her property by saying that one moment before I die, I want all of this property to go to so-and-so, can't possibly set in. Shibud mimechira. He says, because it's like there's no difference between a lien and a sale. Okay, so then he says, Ba'ayin betur be'evan ha'ezer sham, the maisi plugta, the hagaonim be'hahi de isha shemachra minichse milug, im alokeach gova demei hasada mehabal. He says, what would be the halacha? There's a discussion in the tour. If let's say Yankel purchases a field from a woman, and and that woman who sold it to Yankel predeceases her husband, we know that the husband can confiscate the property from Yankel, from the buyer. Now, is Yankel entitled to compensation to get his money back? So, Ubir hachazonish b'chelek even ha'ezer, the tam hasovrim shegova domim. He says the argument to be made as to why Yankel would be entitled to get his money back, dehu mipnei shahamos naso halva'a, because basically the money that Yankel put out is basically was a loan to the woman. That's so long that he could hold on to the property. He was lending her this money and not really purchasing it from her because he had no right to purchase it since there was an outstanding lien on that property from the husband. So therefore, Gava v'zacha b'hen habal kedin nichse milug v'shaper nigva choiv zemi nichse ha'isha. He says basically, since the husband now gets all of her property, he also is the custodian now, or sort of like the obligated party over the loan that was given to her. So he says, the shaper nigva chov zem minichse ha'isha, and therefore the estate of the woman must be used to pay back that loan to Yankel. Delo nasnu lo din lokeach le'inyan zeh she'ein zemin haroi shelokeach yafsid ba'abal yarviach v'yochal v'chadi. He says, because that's not proper, that the husband should be able to confiscate the property and the buyer should be totally out of his money. So that's the Chazon Ish's shita. Va'ayin shom od. He says, and we refer you to there. Amnam anan ha'kaimalan b'shulchan aruch sham ki'idach deya. The habal motzim yad halakuchos below damin. However, we paskin not that way. We paskin that if Yankel purchases a field from a woman and then she predeceases her husband, the halacha is that the husband can confiscate the purchased property and doesn't have to pay Yankel what he put out. The su denira da'af ba'alei dea kamaisa modu bahadidan derak b'mekach shabal marviach damim svirlei dechayiv lahachzir hadamim. And furthermore, even the first opinion would hold that the only time that the husband has to give back Yankel his investment is only when the husband is getting the better deal. In other words, when he's profiting off of taking the property, let's say because the property has accrued in value, Yankel may be paid 100,000, the property is now worth 175,000 or whatever. So then the husband would have to give the 100,000 to Yankel, because it's not proper for the husband to confiscate the property and enjoy, and then Yankel is out of pocket. Done. But in our case, but here, we're not talking about where the woman actually sold her property. We're basically saying where she declares it to be indebted to, let's say, her daughter, or a lien is, or a gift should take place one moment before she dies. There's been no out-of-pocket expenditure from the daughter. So certainly the husband has the right to confiscate that property. And therefore, we're back to our question. There's no way for a woman, for a female testator, to be able to allot her heirs with a gift one moment before she dies to ensure that that her wishes will be fulfilled. In other words, this mechanism of Chatzi Zachar will only work for a male testator. It will not work for a female testator. He says, and therefore it would seem to me that for every man who writes a will and puts in that Chatzi Zachar clause, he should write another clause, Biyatul bishtar ze hischayva shel sikum gadol al atzmo, uzman hapiraon yeshas misas ishto. He says, and therefore he should place another, let's say if a woman is married, he should place make another $100 million gift that is due to be paid Yeheshas misas ishto, at the moment his wife passes away. V'yatil tanai b'hischayvu zu she'imhu yekayim es hamatanos haksuvos b'tzavos ishto az tisbatel hahischayvus hazos. And basically, he's essentially saying, and this is what he can negotiate with his wife. He says, let's say Ruvain is married to Rachel. So Ruvain or Yaakov let's say Yaakov is married to Rachel, and Yaakov writes in his tzava, if I predecease my wife, then I want $100 million to go to my daughter, unless my heirs fulfill my wishes and give my wife X amount of money and give my daughter X amount of money, and so forth and so on. And in that way, then the gift is null and void. Then he should write another piece of paper and say, I, Yaakov, hereby create $100 million gift from my estate to my daughter at the moment that my wife dies. But the gift will only take place if I don't fulfill my wife's wishes with her estate. But as long as I fulfill the wishes of my wife with her estate, then I don't have to give the $100 million away. Okay, v'gam nusach shtar zeh kasab. And in this way, the mechanism is using the husband's assets, not the wife's assets, because the wife can't control her assets, because the husband becomes her heir and inherits immediately, and therefore she can't even make a gift. But if the husband were to write this in his will, that if my wife predeceases me, then $100 million will go to my daughter, unless I fulfill my wife's wishes from the estate that I will inherit from her, so that will also be good. Right. Well, it has to be, this is what you're going to be writing down. You're going to be writing this all down. In other words, what Rav Cohn is suggesting is that the husband and wife should collaborate on the writing of this will so that all contingencies are covered, whether he dies first or she dies first. If he dies first, it's much more straightforward. He does the Chatzi Zachar mechanism that we talked about above. But if she dies first, then what about all of her holdings? That the Chatzi Zachar mechanism won't work. So you have to do a more elaborate mechanism where the husband says that upon my wife's death, assuming that I'm still alive, I hereby gift $100 million at that moment to my daughter, unless I fulfill the wishes of my wife with her estate, which are X, Y, and Z. That's right. Okay. V'gam nusach shtar zeh kasavnu b'samach b'perek beis. I detail the text of that shtar in the next chapter. V'af gever panu yesh lo lichtov shtar zeh shema yinasei achar kav. And he suggests that even a single man should have this clause in his will, because maybe later he'll get married and he'll want to be able to record this as part of his will. V'yesh litzayin shafilu im yirtze lishanot et tzava'ato v'lichtov tzava acheres eno tzarech lachzor v'lichtov od shtar hischayvus sharei shtar ha'ischayvus tolehu be'ezeh shehi tzava'aso ha'achronim. He says, let us also point out that whatever clauses we're going to suggest be appended to your will, you don't have to update them every time you update your will, because the clause basically says to uphold the wishes that are contained in my will. So it'll just be appended to whatever is the latest will. Okay, so that's not going to be an issue. Let's go on to the next page. B'terem shenatzia lifnei hakorei et nusach shtarei hayitchayvut. He says, before we present the text of these documents, nakdim od, let's also point out, shegam haniftar min ha'olam below shum ksivas tzava'a nechnas gam ke bichlal hachashash shel gezel shehizkarnu l'mayla. He says, is also entering into the realm of being a participant in theft. Shaharei b'mikre kazeh chok hamalchus hu hakoveya esofan chiluk ha'izavon. He says, because when there is no will, then the government steps in and has a formula for who inherits first. Okay, va'oto chok eno mat'im mishpatei ha'yerusha ha'mevuarim b'Torah. And the government's hierarchy of inheritance does not conform to the Torah's. V'lachein ra'ui l'chol adam lichtov tzava'a utehei ota tzava mat'ima l'chukei ha'Torah kenal. And therefore, it is important for every Jew to write a will, because when you don't write a will, you're leaving it up to the government, and they're going to end up stealing money from your true heirs. Yesh lahazkir od shaharei yeladim ktanim nachutz lahem ma'od la'otzi belichtov shtar tzava v'hi kidei lemanot bo apitropus lefakech al kol inyanei yaldehem. He says there's another reason that when a person has minor children, it's also important to have a will, so that the will state that you appoint a custodian over to oversee the care of your minor children. Because if the parents die, God forbid, and leave over minor children, then the government can step in, appoint a ward over the children, and that in itself is very dangerous. In other words, putting aside all financial concerns in this last paragraph, he says every parent should have a will so that they can say who's going to take parental control over their children. Because you don't want the government to be in charge of that, because anything can happen in that situation. Okay, so let's take a look at the Nusach Shtarei Hitchayvut. So here's the first one. Shtar Hitchayvut shel kol adam hakotev tzava. This should be the standard text of every person who writes a will. Now, he also has this in English in the back of the book. So what I'll do is I haven't photocopied that part yet, but I will photocopy it for you at some point in the future. So he says, Ani, I, so-and-so, biyom so-and-so, lechodesh so-and-so, on such and such a date, shnat, whatever. Matzir et de lahalan do declare as follows. Im hayorshim shali lo yevatru al zuchut hayerusha shalahem be'izavoni kidei lekayem et tzavaati ha'acharona. He says, if my heirs do not forgive their inherited portion, what they're entitled to by the Torah, in fulfilling my wishes, in fulfilling my last will and testament, or let's say I have multiple heirs. Some of those heirs are not willing to forego their rightful inheritance. And another portion of my heirs are willing to fulfill my wishes and give up from their inheritance. Then and let's see, the imchol hazoche bishtar hitchayvut zeh et zechuto. The person, you just see what those words actually mean. One second. He says in the footnote, he says, Atam lazedim lo nimsu shegam oto yoresh shemerutze b'kiyum hatzava mitchayev kefi chelko beha'izavon behitchayvuto shel shtar zeh. He says, V'lachein hutna shelo tochul hitchayvut ela im kein yimchol lahayoresh hahu et chelko behitchayvut hahi. I'm not really sure I understand this part, but basically I think what he's saying is that v'imchol hazoche bishtar hitchayvut zeh et zuchuto hazeh klape otam hayarshim hamevatrim al zuchut hayerusha shalahem. That what's going to happen is that there's going to be an obstacle set up, because let's say one of the heirs is not willing to abide by my will, and he's going to make a claim that the Bible entitles him to a certain Yerusha. All of the other heirs are totally fine. So what's going to happen is that the person that I'm appointing in this little statement will have to forgive their gift and leave it up to those heirs who are willing to fulfill my wishes. as yasubu kol hatanoim hamurim b'shtar zel hayorshim shalahem or yorshe yorshehem v'chulei. And if my heirs pass away before me, then their heirs will have to fulfill the following conditions. And so basically, in the event that even if one of my heirs protests my will, as hareini mitchayev me'achshav, or mitchayebet, whether if it's a female, I hereby obligate myself from this moment forward, sach, the amount of X number of dollars. And he writes in the footnote, Yesh lichtov kan sikum katsuv, v'yesh lahagdil hasikum harbe ma'od, ad sheyeh lahayorshim bevadai bezul yoter, l'kayim etanai hatzava milashlam et ha'itchayvut shebishtar. Put in an amount that far exceeds the value of your estate, so that it will certainly be an incentive for them to fulfill the wishes of your will, rather than pay out this gift. Le, and then you write the name. It could be any person at all. Okay, but usually people put down one of their female children. And then you write. We continue with this contract. He writes, Uzman piraon shel chov zeh hu shah echad kodem mitati. And the time of payment of the payment is due of this gift 1 moment before I die. B'chol nichasim v'kinyanin de'isli techos kol shemaya de'kanoi u'da'asid anolamikni, and also all of my assets that I have underneath the heaven, that I have already acquired or that I will acquire in the future. Nichsin de'islahon achrayas u'deleslahon achrayas. Whether this property is encumbered or unencumbered, meaning it could be chattel, it could be real estate. All of my estate is included in this lien to pay this gift. You can extract payment from my estate, even if it means taking the shirt off my back. And whether I'm alive or dead. And this gift is permanent from this day forward. And even if it means extracting the money from minor heirs, I still want this gift to be binding. Below Yorshai Acharai, below Shum Adam Ba'olam Neman, Afilu Bishvua Chamura, Liton Shum Taina Ba'olam Hagora'as Koach Shtar Chovzeh. He says, there is no person in this world among my heirs or any other individual who can make any claim, even with an oath, to nullify this gift. Rak Adarabba, Oto Shani Mitchayev Lo, B'chol boy kocho yiyu ne'emanim la'olam negdi v'neged yorshai acharai. But the person that I have named in this contract, which is a gift contract, shall be always have the upper hand of believability against my heirs. V'neged kol boy koche v'dibor hakal, and anyone else who tries to act as my representative. The person named in this piece of paper shall always have the advantage by just making a simple statement, Velishum Allah ushvua uvelishum kabbalas cheir, and he will not be obligated to take any oaths or any acceptance of curses upon himself. Lomar shtar chov zeh eno parua, he will be believed when he says that this debt has not yet been paid. Velo nimchal shibudo, nor was the obligation ever forgiven. Unless my heirs can produce a receipt that he or she has already received their gift with edim, o adenikra kera beistin, or until this piece of paper is torn in the presence of a beistin. Ushtar zeh afal pi she'iyeh munach tachas yadi, yihiyeh l'raya berura l'chol hanal, and even though this piece of paper is not in the possession of the giftee, but is rather kept in my possession, it shall still be legally binding for all of the aforementioned. V'lo yo'il shum ta'ana shel piraon o chazara uchedome, and nor shall any claim that this gift has already been paid off, or that I have revoked the gift, no claim of such a manner shall be admitted in court. V'itchayvut zu nase ba'oifen hamoel ketokev kol shtari hitchayvut in the dahigi b'Yisrael, and I want this to have all good legal standing based on the laws of Israel, ha'asuyin ketikun chazal, that are instituted by the sages, the lo ka'asmachta, the lo ketov deshtara, and it shall not be viewed as an asmachta. Remember these terms from the end of Imrei Yaakov. What was an asmachta? Right, not to be an exaggeration, not to be taken seriously, or tovsei deshtara. What does that term mean? Something written on the last line of the shtar, which has no legal standing, right? I do not want this paper to be interpreted as in any other way other than legally binding. V'hina'a says shelo ba'ones v'hechrech klal. I write this without any coercion whatsoever. Ki im belev shalem v'nefesh chafetza. I write it with a full heart and fully cognizant and desirous of this to transpire. V'deya shlema u'miyusheves, and I'm of sound mind. V'hinasis b'veistin chashuv v'roi u'v'kinyan gamor agav sudar, and I have enacted this in a beistin chashuv, in a reliable beistin. Now, does that mean that it has to be enacted in a beistin chashuv? So that's a really good question, because normally we don't require that. So I'm just going to go to the footnote really quickly on this one point. He says, if you look at the very bottom of the page over here, v'hinasis b'veistin chashuv v'roi, v'atam shekostin kein hu lahotzi midei chashash shel asmachta d'lo kanya. He says the reason why you have to put that clause in, that it was done in the presence of a beis din, is to remove the possibility or the accusation that it wasn't done in a serious way. D'lo tema kevin shetala chiyuvo beheder kiyamatzava havalei kasmachta d'lo kanya. All right, we'll have to hold it here because I want to spend a little bit of time on that clause, because we don't really require it to be done in the presence of a beis din. But you say that it was done in the presence of a beis din to make sure that everyone takes it seriously. We'll continue Mirz Hashem on Monday. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.